Our next speaker is Chad Renando from Fire Station 101. Now, Fire Station 101 is Ipswich City Council's innovation hub that helps entrepreneurs and startups build, grow and scale their ideas. Launched in March 2016 with 18 members, the hub has grown to over 15 members involved in virtual reality, smart city, transport, education, health, social enterprise and more. Community Manager Chad Renando will share with us about the journey up to now and the role the innovation hubs can play in building community resiliency. So please, would you welcome Chad as he comes? Thank you.
Why, hello. Fire Station 101. So I'm the community manager of Fire Station 101, and I'm pitching this conversation around practitioners and around people that are involved in setting things up like innovation hubs, and understanding what is the role that they have in building resiliency, particularly in regional communities. And just by way of the name, we are built in an old fire station. If you are looking at setting up a hub, I don't necessarily recommend that. I do get about 3 or 4 phone calls a week asking me to help them with magpies in their chimneys, cats in trees, telling me about a fire in Bundamba. So there's a bit of confusion there. But what we are, as was just mentioned, we are a place where pretty much anyone with a bright spark of an idea can come and build, grow, and scale their business. And so we talk a lot about technology, about innovation, because you need that to scale something. But when I took the role back in February, I started asking the question, what is the role of an innovation hub in building resiliency in a community, and in particular regional communities? Because regional communities, more than anything, are at risk of certain disruptions. When we hear about the concept of resiliency, quite often we hear about things such as the physical disruptions that can happen, such as a fire or a flood. Out in Ipswich and a lot of the regions, we had those floods back in 2011, and 3 of those pictures are of my street or of my house. But we know that the market disruptions can be just as impacting, just as painful for a region. And that impact is long-term, and particularly for disadvantaged segments of the society. So people who are potentially in lower skill sets, lower wage earners, lower skilled jobs, have a harder time coming back from disruptions. And this is real. Just as a fire or a flood would impact on life, jobs have the same thing. We've all heard the concepts, the stats around jobs that are going away. 50% of all jobs gone in the next 10 or 20 years. I went to a CETA lunch about 1.5 years ago. 5 million jobs gone in the next 10, 20 years. Well, that's not too bad because we've got another 18.5 years left, right, before those jobs are gone. But it doesn't quite work that way, because we know that when those jobs go, particularly in regional areas, it's going to cost millions of dollars. So instead of waiting for that to happen and reacting and trying to invest in those regions, what would it look like to actually invest beforehand, but not necessarily having to have the answer? To invest in innovation without necessarily knowing what you're going to have. And so that, I believe, is the role of an innovation hub, which is why we're hearing the term all over the place. Much like the minister said this morning, at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, we keep hearing innovation. A challenge with that is that particularly at a broader level, somebody goes to you and says, go do innovation, be innovative, and come back when you're innovating. Well, you come back and say, am I innovating enough? Well, no, innovate more. Okay, and you try even harder doing something. And you get a lot of places like Fire Station and River City Labs and these hubs opening up. There's an accelerator that seems to be opening up 2 or 3 a week these days. I do question within Brisbane whether there's going to be more square meters than startups pretty soon of co-working spaces and innovation hubs. And again, one of the challenges that we can have with that is if we just do innovation for innovation's sake, we can be leaving entire segments of the community behind. I mean, you think about even apps on your phone, it's assuming that I can actually afford a smartphone. It's assuming that I can actually do this with my thumb and I can press this thing and I can have access to it. We all get excited about Uber, but that's assuming I can afford a taxi in the first place to take advantage of that disruption. And so one risk we have with all this innovation is we have this segment of society that gets even further and further ahead, and that segment that couldn't even take advantage of it in the first place gets further behind. We can watch whatever movie we want with Netflix. I can listen to any music I want through Spotify. I can order a pizza with a tweet. Amazon is spending millions trying to get my product to me a few hours earlier, and we look out the window, and a lot of the tables and exhibitors here are trying to figure out how do we address the systemic inequality and embedded poverty in a meaningful way. Which then has me ask, what is the role, again, of an innovation hub? And it's important to understand that an innovation hub is a third space. Other examples we have of a third space is church, a third space around faith and religion, or a soccer club, which is a third space around family and sports. And an innovation hub is a third space around entrepreneurship, around innovation, around a whole bunch of people just giving it a go. It's a place where you can come and do community, be in community. And so that's what I believe we're creating with Fire Station 101. So Fire Station 101 is, we believe, the only innovation hub fully owned, operated, and supported by a local council. Local councils are getting involved in the innovation space. But Ipswich City Council said, you know what, we're all in. We're going to buy the asset. We're going to employ the person running it. We're going to handle the operating costs. We're going to give it a go. There's other models of hubs out there. There's community-driven, venture capital-driven, university-driven, corporate, and council or government. And each one of those has a different flavor. Wherever that money comes from will determine the flavor of people that come out. And I am a strong proponent of council-driven, of course, because I'm wearing the t-shirt and I'm on stage talking about this, because I believe it's the local council that gets the benefit of the jobs. It gets the benefit of attracting people to the region just to be a part of it. And that's what we have at Fire Station 101. So how have we gone? Well, we opened up on the 8th of March with about 18 members, and a few months later, here we are with just over 50 members, and we have an acquisition rate of about 1 or 2 members a week. Within regional areas, there's a strong demand of people just wanting to give it a go. They want something to bring them together. But it's not about the hub, and it's not about the numbers per se, it's about the members. Innovation happens at the cross-section of ideas. Because we have the hub, we have Dean from the Fixer Windscreen who's able to come in. And originally he had an app idea to build and grow and scale his business. But because he's sitting there next to Anna, who has a kit to help young girls learn and build robotics, he took a look at some of the items in her kit, put it together, and then he attached it to the trucking industry, which is 60% of his client base, and all of a sudden he has a whole new startup idea. And because we're running a regular series of events, he then hooked up with a guy down in Sydney who's now his chief technology officer, and somebody else in South Africa who's going to be his distributor down there. Now, all that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the hub to bring them together. I have Anne-Marie, who's sitting in the audience, who has an app idea to help busy parents and teachers have activities for young people. And because we have the hub and the ecosystem, she's able to cotton on to this whole startup thing, and now she's been successfully engaged as a participant in Impact Academy, which is a social enterprise accelerator out of Brisbane. Now, did we physically actually put her on a program to do that? Well, no, but because we have that ecosystem there, she's able to engage and build some of those networks. So it's about the logos, it's about the individuals behind these that can then come together in a central place. Most of the members that we have are at the early stage. Look, back in 2015, they did an assessment in the regions, and we had 5 startups on our books. I now have just over 53 members, plus we have another co-working space that opened up about half hour away in Ipswich, Little Tokyo 2. There's a huge demand, but you don't go from 5 to over 50 and have these rich, digitally mature companies. You have to focus on where your cohort is. And a lot of our guys are at the ideation stage, validation, MVP, minimum viable product, as we call it. And quite often, they just come through the door with a bunch of scribbles on a Post-it note saying, I think I got an idea. We do have a bit of a barrier to entry for members coming into our hub. We are more than just a co-working space, more than just a place to run, say, a service-based business. We do ask that first you have passion. You have to believe in what it is you're doing. This isn't a 9-to-5 gig. We're open 24 hours a day, and I can go in there at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I've got people still trying to build, grow, and scale their business. I go there at 9 in the morning, I can have very few people in there because they're out there trying to just do the stuff. So you have to have passion. You have to have domain knowledge. You have to kind of have a bit of experience in the idea of what you want to build. If you want to build Facebook for cats, and you've never been on social media, and you hate animals, this probably isn't for you. But if you have a bit of background in what it is that you want to do, great, come on board. And finally, we ask that you be building something that what we call attracts capital. It has to be a bit of a platform that people can invest in, because what we want is not just to impact local, but scale global. How do we get you that customer, not just in Ipswich, but in Connecticut, in Singapore, in the UK? So how are we going? Really, it's up to the members to tell us. As they say in the term, eating our own dog food, we ask them and say, well, how are we doing? Are we helping you realize your startup entrepreneurial goals? In general, yes. And why? Community and culture is a big one. Because when you get that safe environment, it allows people to open up and start collaborating. And that's real collaboration. Collaboration happens when I give you something that's mine. If it's not, it's just this competitive collaboration, scarcity mindset. We try and build that culture in the community where the free flowing of ideas and just giving back happens. The mentoring and the network is the other one. And bringing in that cohort of people that can just give back, both from a mentoring perspective. The physical space, look, that's fairly low as far as a value proposition. If I didn't have the space, I wouldn't attract the people, but most of the people aren't there for the space. They're there for the community and the cohort and the networks and the events. So in general, we ask them the question every few months, how are we going? What are the 3 words that we describe how we go? Supportive, community, exciting, helpful, inspiring, encouraging, sometimes frustrating, challenging. These are all words that come up and it's things that you'd expect. So, the playbook. Again, assuming I'm talking to practitioners around people that are either starting hubs, that are going to be embedding in these, that want to participate in them, what's that look like? So my vision, the vision of Fire Station 101. We want to be a premier space for startups and entrepreneurs. We want Ipswich to be that. The nice thing about that is that's bigger than me, it's bigger than Fire Station, it's bigger than the bricks and mortars. What would it look like if you didn't need Fire Station 101? What would it look like if we didn't need innovation hubs? Well, that could be very likely where every high school, every church, every corporation had an innovation hub. We have high schools in the region that are creating their own hubs, and nothing makes me happier. What if innovation just happened? You go into Facebook, and I would imagine they probably don't have a head of innovation officer that goes around and drives innovation in the business. It's embedded throughout. Now, we're not there yet. By the same token, you think about the other third spaces, what would it look like if we were all just connected to our spirituality and cared for each other, and we didn't need churches? How cool would that be? But we're not there yet, so we need those. And so we're not just doing innovation on itself, so we need places like Fire Station. But ultimately, this is bigger than us. It's an ethos. It's a belief system. So how are we going to do that? First, it's building the ecosystem. If you're looking at either building an innovation hub, being a part of it, you have to understand what that ecosystem is. And that's our members, our mentors, our investors, our corporate partners, and our volunteers and our interns. And it usually attached to a university in some way. And all of those are looking at the entrepreneurs and saying, please make it, please be a success. The other members want you to be a success because they want to see what it looks like. The mentors want you to be a success because they want to be able to say, I was a part of that, and potentially then moving to a board of advisors or an investor. The investors want you to be a success because they want a return on their investment. The volunteers and interns want you to be a success because ideally they want that first employment. They want to be able to enter the job market, and I have 53 potential employers in there. The next one is delivering member outcomes. And really that's ultimately what it's about. It's all well and good for me to talk about member numbers, but the real numbers I want are customer acquisition, revenue growth, profit, customer retention. We want those outcomes. And for that, we will be putting in things like accelerators and structured programs to be able to help these people not just grow in Ipswich, but also expand overseas. Delivering community outcomes. Again, because we're attached to council, we're going to be doubling down on that unique selling proposition. Because whatever that funding comes from, we want to support that. In 2 or 3 years, if my operating revenue is equal to my operating cost, that's okay, but will be worth the money we put into it. However, if 1/3 to 1/2 of Fire Station is supporting community outcomes, social enterprise, social impact, that's exciting. Because then we can actually make a difference in that disadvantaged sector. Developing the innovation pipeline. That's where we have engagements into high schools, engagements into the people that are coming into it. Over the last 2 terms, we engaged with one of the local high schools to build social enterprise entrepreneurs, and we have 3 young people that came out. One of them who wanted to do t-shirt designs. And so he created a t-shirt platform which can then raise funds for medical aid in the Congo, which is where his parents are from, because he's a refugee and he really connected with that as an outcome. Another young man whose grandfather had hip surgery and he couldn't get around as much anymore, and he realized that most mobility devices are just for one purpose. But what if you actually drop something on the ground? So he's building a multi-purpose cane to actually help you pick things up as well as walk around. And another young man who's in grade 9, and he wrote a book about narwhals to help raise funds to sponsor and support an endangered species of narwhal. Now, if Fire Station 101 wasn't there, and if we weren't running these programs in schools, these young people would be like, well, I got an idea, but what do I do with it? We're also working with a local prison to try and create entrepreneurial programs in there to reduce recidivism, because we know that people coming out of prison, goal setting and mentoring builds self-efficacy, or a belief that I actually do something, which then reduces their likelihood of going back in if they're in a community where they think they actually have an opportunity. Or in school leavers, people grade 10, 11, and 12 who hop out of the school system. And as a society, we look at that and say, oh, you didn't make it. You're not actually part of the establishment. But within the entrepreneurial community, we look at that and say, great, you just won the lottery. Fantastic, we're going to help you build and scale a business. So how do we develop that pipeline coming in? Because right now, if I'm just trying to get every entrepreneur working out of their home, that's a scarce resource, and pretty soon we'll tap that out. But if we try and create an army of entrepreneurs and innovators in the grade 10, 11, and 12s, and the people that aren't connected in the establishment, there will always be enough. And finally, inspiring innovation leadership. This conversation that we're having and the opportunity that we can present, it can be challenging, and it's a bit different. So how do we do innovation leadership, not just within the hub, but within council, or whatever that funding body is, to take them on the journey? Within the local regions, your local chamber of commerce, your local Rotary. Quite often they're just focused on membership base. So how do we take them on a bit of the entrepreneurial journey? Across the state. Whatever you do here, how do you raise it as an example? I want to learn from Logan. Logan should be learning from Ipswich. How do we raise the overall level across the state, across the nation? How do we be an example for the likes of Victoria or Perth? And finally, globally, whatever we do, how do we create those connections in some of our sister cities overseas, because every region has one? And so how do we do it? Look, it's through creating the products, the platforms, the programs. We do have to be efficient and generate revenue, and running regular events. 2 things that'll make the hub work. One of them is leadership, and the other one is a very aggressive series of events. If you do not have somebody in the leadership role, look, for me, it's Ipswich. You know, you think about the canvas out in Toowoomba, that's David. Troy up in Cairns, Joe Houlihan up in INQ in Townsville. Whenever you hear about these hubs, a name usually comes to mind. So you need that leader in the position, plus a regular series of events. It is more than just 4 walls and a Wi-Fi, because otherwise we know that we would have entrepreneurs popping out of libraries right, left, and center, and we don't. So how are we doing and what have we done? Look, we've run our 101 sessions, raising the overall skill level, everything from lean canvas to taxation to business modeling. Pitching events. 2 things that people talk about on being a success in the startup community. One of them is, can you communicate your idea? And 2, is it a good idea? And sometimes you can communicate a bad idea and still get funding. So how do we help people communicate it? Running focus groups. How do we bring people in there to have conversations about whatever that startup's about? Quite often a startup comes in, and the one thing they need is the customer. Funding and customer, and quite often that customer can provide the funding. So what we do is we create a bit of a brand around that. One of our members is creating a platform to engage the older generation in entrepreneurship, employment, and volunteering. And so we run a focus group and say, what does that mean for the community? And get the recruiters in the room and get that entire ecosystem. The next thing you know, she's now running focus groups every week for the last 5 weeks. And those are her first customers. So creating a bit of those pathways. And one of the mentors that's in the room now went out and had a conversation with her, and she says, well, I'm so surprised at how far she's come. The pipeline. Again, running those programs in the schools, engaging into where your customers are going to be tomorrow. And running the events, if you have a space, whatever that third space is, running things like TEDx or events like this in the hub so that people come into the room at a place like this, but ideally 10% of us would stay and actually get an idea. One of the types of events I run is what I call communities of practice, because we know that innovation isn't necessarily done to a postcode. A postcode does not create community. What does create community is specific focus of interest, a community of practice. And so what I do is I run community of practice events for the arts community, for the health community, for the small business, large corporate, disabilities. And I get leaders in the room on a panel. And I open it up and I say, okay, well, who wants a piece of this? And we fill a room, 30, 40, 50 people, serve a lot of beer, serve some nibbles. And we ask them the question, what are your biggest challenges? What are your biggest opportunities? If we do that 2 or 3 times, somebody in the audience will raise their hand and say, I want a piece of that. Bang, we've just created a new entrepreneur. Like we've heard a lot of speakers today saying, here's the challenges, here's the opportunities. A lot of entrepreneurs in here could raise their hand and say, I want a piece of that. What if this was an innovation hub? What if they actually stay here after and start building, growing, and scaling and acting on whatever it is that we talked about? Well, that's what you do in a third space like Fire Station. Regional innovation. I'm very excited about the new state program that came out, which talks about regional innovation, $500,000 per region. And I like the way that they positioned it in that you have to prove collaboration. How does each region have a bit of an innovation association? So it's not just about Fire Station or Little Tokyo 2 or Council. But how do we come together as a region and show leadership there? And again, as I mentioned, communities of practice. Look, so in closing, the journey of somebody in Fire Station 101 is really the journey of the entrepreneur. When you do a startup, it's simply an excuse to lean in, to give something a go, to try something new. That's all we're really doing, and you're not going to find a better way of learning who you are and building and growing than by doing a startup. Because you're going to face your fears, you're going to find new opportunities. I love the quote that Martin Luther King said. He said, I can't be everything I can be until you're everything you can be. Quite often we don't know what success looks like. Most of us are stumbling our way through, trying to figure it out. I mean, what examples do we have? Our parents initially, our bosses, the media, TV, Australian Idol, our politicians. Me being from America, of course, I look at that and say, is that the example? And so one good opportunity to have that example is going through the entrepreneurial journey, surrounding yourself with other people that are going on that same process. That's the purpose of an innovation hub. Community resiliency doesn't necessarily happen at a broad scale. Yes, there's policy levers and things like that we can do, but it happens at the heart and mind of the individual because everybody's looking for those leaders to say, please, give it a go. I want to see what it looks like. I don't quite know. And when you make a mistake and fail, I'll give you a hug and say thank you, because that means that's something I don't necessarily need to do and we can learn together. And that's what happens in a community such as an innovation hub. So how do we build resiliency? It happens in the hearts and minds of the individuals. And so for what I hear happening in Logan, I know there's something happening with Griffith University. I'm very excited about that, Substation 33, if that gets off the ground. Engage with those either as a mentor, as an investor, as a commercial partner to be their first customer, as a volunteer or intern, just to learn and grow and scale as you do it, or even as a member, if you have your own idea, be a part of it. And again, just give it a go.